Hi everybody, Josh Knight the First here with another episode of Exade Replay, coming to you with episode 31 of the series. Let's get right into it. So happy Mother's Day to everybody. Normally I wouldn't think that there's too many mothers watching this show, but the reason I bring that up is that this week's episode seems to be kind of mothers-centric, or at least parental-centric, so we'll go ahead and talk about that, but first let's go with what happened at the beginning of the episode. Now I do want to start off again by talking about the opening. Of course, last week we saw that we can clearly see Kamen Rider Paradox level 99 there in the opening. This week we've got Kuroto Dan back in the opening. Now if you'll notice when you're watching there, you see Hiro Taiga, some sort of a weird blur, Kuroto Dan, and then everybody else in the opening. So now I'm wondering about the gap that there was before we added Kuroto Dan back to the opening. This gap that we have here clearly seems to be for Kirya, since he would have been that person back at the beginning when we first had those riders available. So my idea right now, as it stands, is that they're going to bring him back some way, somehow, and some things later on in this episode seem to feed into that. But let's go ahead and actually talk about the show. So as it stands, everybody is getting used to life in the CR now, with Kuroto Dan back in the mix. He's commandeering parts of Poppy People Papo's cabinet there in the CR. He's talking about, oh, refer to me by my new name, Neo or Shin Kuroto Dan, which means nothing. It's just an honorific he decided to give himself, but whatever. Point being, he's going on about how it was that he's the godlike person here. He's the game master. He was able to prove that no one ever really dies so long as you save the data. And speaking of which, we get to see these powers further displayed as he transforms there in the first fight into Kamen Rider Genmu. So we see that he's got two additional powers besides what he talked about last week with the ability to nullify Bugster virus. It actually takes it a step further in that if he actually physically touches a Bugster, i.e. Pawlod, he's able to reduce the level drastically. So going from level 99, just holding on to him, he can drop him by about 20 levels very quickly. The bigger thing, of course, is the fact that he was using, as he describes, an alpha version of the Proto Mighty Action X Gashat, which allows him the ability of continues, which he shows in a very comical way of the continue there. Basically, it's the tube from Mario. Let's not kid ourselves, it's Mario. And with this newfound power, he can actually troll everybody, since he now told everyone that he has 99 lives, 98 lives thanks to this fight with Paradox. So the thing about that is, why would you tell everybody that up front? That's the kind of information I would have kept secret a little bit longer. You would think you would want to keep that ace in the hole, but based off his personality, no, Kuroto Dan had to tell everybody what his brilliant plan was. Now there's some other things I wanted to bring up here in this first fight, namely that it seemed kind of obvious that Maximum Mighty Action X was on some kind of hoverboard to catch up with the Bugster there at the beginning, which is a little comical, but you know, whatever. The bigger thing I want to talk about is actually ride player Niko. Now from what we're being told, Niko is actually doing very well in Kamen Rider Chronicle. She's been able to capture these Gasha trophies from beating the Bugsters several times over. But the thing about it is, with this episode counted, we've only seen her defeat 2 Bugsters. Now the thing about it is, one, it's kind of comical, but that's in keeping with her style. Fine, I'll let that pass. But the other thing about it is that we're not seeing this stuff happen on screen. It's kind of the thing that I talked about last week, but even worse. If there's some stuff that you want to focus on due to story, that makes sense. But when we have not that many female characters to focus on and kind of level up, pardon the pun, in a Kamen Rider show, it kind of means something to that portion of the audience, to the female viewing audience, or just people who like seeing strong female characters, that they get to see that power, show her, display her prowess as a gamer. Now, as I was saying at the top of the episode, this is kind of the Mother's Day episode, in that the ride player that was saved there in that first fight happens to be a mother who lost her son to a game over there in Kamen Rider Chronicle. And of course this resonates with Asuna and Emu, who clearly see that this is a problem. Kuroto Dan, on the other hand, doesn't have that kind of empathy. Now the thing about it is, he'll have to develop some of that empathy based off the revelations that we have specifically from Poppy People Papo. Now, as we talked about before, Poppy was starting to have flashbacks of the person she grew out of as a Bugster. Turns out that they did confirm who that was. It is in fact Kuroto Dan's mother. The idea behind that is that Kuroto Dan possibly infected his mother with the Bugster virus in order to keep her past her own terminal illness. But the thing about that is Kuroto Dan is still kind of a douchebag. So as such, he still wants to talk about him being God. He can program things better. He's better than the doctors. I could cure what you couldn't cure. And that doesn't really rub anybody the right way, nor should it. Now this becomes another portion of the episode that gets focused on a lot as far as the message of the episode, which is this overarching idea of respect for the sanctity of life. Kuroto Dan doesn't seem to have that, in that he thinks of the world a lot differently. As a programmer, he sees things in terms of data. So if he could convert a human life into data, much like he did with himself, then people could live on past their expiration dates, shall we say. But with Emu, in his thinking as a medical professional, as a doctor, he realizes that people only have one life, and it's his job to preserve that. So what you end up having is these two ideals clash there. Really well done, in my opinion, because, yeah, based off your profession, you would see the world a little bit differently, and I can't say that either one of them is wrong. We've seen plenty of examples of people wanting to cheat death and other types of media here and there, so it's nice to see how they're adapting to that here in this show, as opposed to another show where you could have talked about death and it didn't go that great. Yes, Ghost, I'm looking at you. So for our last fight here in the episode, it's actually at a very familiar location, this dam out in the middle of nowhere in Japan. Now for those of you who have been watching with eagle eyes, you might recognize that this was a location that was used in the Kamen Rider 3 movie back during Kamen Rider Drive a few years ago, but more famously, it was used during Kamen Rider Z-Cross's special Birth of the 10th Rider. After an impassioned speech from Poppy trying to convince Kuroto Dan of why he needs to keep fighting and how she can kind of forgive him, basically for being her father, it's kind of weird, he fathered his own mother, you know, take that as you will, Kuroto and Emu decide to put aside their differences for right now to focus on beating Paradox. And I have to say, this is probably one of the best fights I've seen here throughout the series, because you have three very capable combatants. You have Genmu, you have Paradox, you have Exade, and they all know exactly how to use the field. You see Emu pushing Kuroto Dan into the power-up that he needs to go ahead and help take on Palad. You also see this very nice sequence, albeit in total CG, where everybody picks up a speed-up power-up, and it looks like friggin' Dragon Ball, but it comes across very convincing. And then the final twin attack between Genmu and Exade, mwah, just beautifully executed. I couldn't have asked for more. Now, as a result of this fight, something very questionable has happened in that Palad was holding on to the dangerous zombie Gasha, and we all know how much that was a problem early on in the series. Well, now Kuroto Dan has it back. Maybe it won't be so much of a problem since the effects that Emu had put on it from their last fight together are still in effect, so maybe he can go ahead and use that, as we're seeing in previews for the next episode, but it won't be nearly as trolly. Or maybe it will. I mean, come on, let's face it, it's Kuroto Dan we're dealing with again. Now, before the episode ends, we do have to deal with a few housekeeping issues, namely one thing that's kind of been bugging me for the last couple of episodes, and that Kuroto Dan gives Taiga his own copy of the Gasha Dual Gear. Now, this will allow both riders to achieve their level 50 forms. Now, I figured at some point they were going to have to make another copy of this, because, let's face it, it was kind of lame with one person being able to go level 50, and the other person stuck at level 5. Yes, okay, yeah, they were dogging Hero this whole time. But with all of this is all feeding into this big, giant build-up to next week's episode, where all the combatants are going to be going at one another, and we're going to see the debut of the new rider, Kamen Rider Kronos, who seems to be very powerful and have control over time, as we're told. So yeah, this episode was very plot-heavy, but they handled it in a very nice way. I like the overtones of what it means to be a parent between Kuroto Dan reveling in his creation of Poppy, or Poppy remembering little things about what it's like to be a mom from Kuroto Dan's mother's memories. At the same time, they're also treating the other characters with great care, and that Taiga still cares about what happens to people, even though he says he wants to be Kamen Rider Chronicle. Yeah, he still remembers everything that happened in episode 0, and Hiro clearly wants his girlfriend back, even though he doesn't admit it to everybody, but otherwise, why would he be playing Kamen Rider Chronicle on the side? So overall, yes, I do think this was a great episode, but I want to hear what you guys thought in the comments below. So let's go ahead and talk about some of the things that this episode brought up. Firstly, Saiba Niko. So as ride player Niko, do you think they should be showing more of her fights, or are you fine just showing her win 1 or 2 matches and then telling us she beat 7 other bugsters? Secondly, what about Hiro? Do you think he should have been more upfront about playing Kamen Rider Chronicle and let the other riders help him, or do you think it's more in keeping with his character that he be the lone wolf and think he's better than everyone else? And lastly, since we have Kuroto Dan back and we see that he has this new Mario Warp power, how many episodes do you think it'll take before he runs out of lives? You tell me in the comments below. And of course, during the week, you can always talk to me over on social media. On Twitter, I'm at JoshKnight1st. This has been episode 31 of Exade Replay for episode 31 of the series, The Forbidden Continue. I'm Josh Knight the First. I'll see you guys again next week.